Hello and welcome to The Loudspeaker, your definitive guide on how to scale your startup.
This first tip for every fintech startup is:
what are the media and press saying about us? How are we being perceived by these people?
PR stunts are any activities that allow you to engage with the audience.
I don't agree with the fact that all publicity is good publicity.
Here is where we talk to communications professionals from all around the world to let you know what are the best practices and cool ideas that you can implement for your startups.
Ranjini, thank you so much for joining me today. And would you be able to kick off by telling us who you are and a little bit about your podcast, the PR Playbook?
Yes, of course. So my name is Ranjini Joshua. I'm the CEO and owner of The Silver Telegram. We are a PR agency focused on media relations and thought leadership for technology companies. And about 2 years ago, I think, I wrote a book called The PR Playbook. And the purpose of the book was to be able to give basically entrepreneurs, startups, marketing professionals, anybody who wanted to do PR, a really easy manual or guide to understanding the media landscape, understanding public relations, and then also being able to do it themselves. So we are going to be launching the PR Playbook second edition workbook. So it's going to be like a full comprehensive workbook that you can literally just create your PR plan in this book. And that's where the PR Playbook podcast came from. The idea is that it's a simple guide to be able to give you small tips that you can literally take away in 10 minutes and actually go do something at your desk in relation to public relations, media, thought relations, or brand awareness. So the idea is for the segments to be short enough that you can go to, work right after. And then we do get to feature some really cool interviews with other marketing professionals, people who explain SEO, just anybody who wants to learn kind of the basics of marketing and PR, social media, influencer relations, all that kind of stuff, for them to have the information they need to make that next decision. And then also we interview some really cool journalists that give us an inside look on PR and how it works and their perspective so that people can understand the other side of the fence as well.
It sounds like a very holistic approach to PR and marketing in that sense. And one thing I do really like is that you said you do it in like small chunks of like information. And that's fantastic. I think that's a great approach because that's a very digestible and easy way of learning and consuming knowledge. So I think that's a very smart idea.
Yeah, I think their shortest episode is 5 minutes.
And so you're here today to discuss knowing when you're ready for PR. Before discussing when is a good time to get into PR, can you explain for our listeners why the rule, the sooner the better, doesn't apply here and what the consequences of jumping into PR too soon are?
Of course. That's a great question. I work with a lot of startup companies. As I know, your audience is quite full of startups and people who are just starting new businesses. And I don't believe people understand. I think some people have that idea that any PR is good PR. It's really not. And I think it's really important to be able to have some of the basic pieces together. And the most basic of the pieces is messaging. If you don't know what you want to say and who you want to say it to before you start PR, which happens, believe it or not, then you will have mixed messaging when you go out to other people. So you might do one interview and say something, and then you'll go into another interview and you might say something a little bit different, and it starts becoming confusing. Consistency in advertising, marketing, PR, that is really, really important, especially when you're trying to establish a brand that has like some kind of mission or values. Because if you don't repeat the same thing over and over again, you sound like you're confused or you're not sure, you haven't made those decisions yet. So I think the most important thing when starting and making sure to start off right is really having that messaging component and having those few key pieces of what you are going to talk about. What do you stand for as a brand, as a company, whether it's technology or lifestyle or whatever. You have these like few statements that you can repeat over and over again. And then that will also like be as a touchstone where you can come back and say, okay, does what I'm about to say, like, is it married to that first statement that I said? And so that way you can kind of also have some kind of consistency overall in having a very directional message when you're speaking to media.
Yeah, I definitely think that's important. And
Mhm.
I feel sorry for always tearing this example apart, but obviously Fire Festival, I think, is a prime example of something which is organize their PR more than they've organized the actual idea itself, and then sending out
Right.
disjointed messages of like, it's going to be this, it's going to be that, you can expect this, you can expect that. So definitely, I think that you're absolutely right, taking the time to first establish like what you're going after. And I suppose it's less of a time thing and more of a preparation thing, rather than
Yeah,
saying
and
like, oh, you can't do it within 1 week, you can't do it in 2 weeks, rather than setting like a specific time. It's like, make sure you're at this stage rather than you're at this time, I guess.
exactly. Yeah, totally agree with that. And some people are like, okay, well, how long is this going to take? Well, it takes however long you put into it. And yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's just preparation. And preparation for startups is really important because once you start, you can't really go backward. So I think prepping a lot in advance is probably better. And then sometimes it paralyzes some of these startup owners. So it just depends on how much of a perfectionist you are. But I think you really just have to have like a basic line of thinking when you go into it, for sure.
Yeah. And obviously, I mentioned Fire Festival there, but do you have any examples or case studies of businesses that have entered PR too soon?
Well, Fire Festival is a really good one. I laugh because I always think of that when I think of either opportunities I can create for myself, because if that guy could do it, we could do it,
Yeah.
or bad PR stories, which is, that one. I think a lot of people, one other PR kind of nightmare that I remember, and it's not my own, but remember that Kendall Jenner Pepsi thing? Like, what
Yes.
were they thinking?
Yeah. In fact, I don't even think that was broadcast. I don't know. I don't know if that was broadcast outside of the US, but I know that advert and I've never even seen it just because of the poor publicity that it gained.
I mean, it was so silly. Like, I don't know why there wasn't a checks and balances in watching that and saying, yeah, this is not right. But that's a very famous example. I mean, in United States, Susan G. Komen is another, the breast cancer awareness. That's a really another good example of terrible PR. And they obviously did not prepare their messages before they went out. But for me, because I work with a lot of small startups, yeah, we actually had a really, I wouldn't say detrimental, maybe it was detrimental now that I think about it, but a very unfortunate experience where the client told us, hey, we're ready to do a review program. And I want these media to review our stuff. And normally we have a little checklist. Okay, let's get this press kit ready. Let's make sure we have instructions. Let's have a welcome letter. Let's have these things set up for the media reviewer, whoever the reviewer is, and make sure that they have everything they need. So we did our part of the PR side, and I will say this is a PR fail. So I'm gonna take the onus on this, as well as the company should, but I'm not going to name them. So we sent out the review unit, and it was to Mashable. So as you can see, Mashable is a really amazing job, we figured, of SEO. We found out at the end of it all. So they're an amazing outlet, obviously reaching millions and millions of people, but they do really good job in SEO. And this was the very first review unit that we sent out because we had his ear, the editor's ear, and we thought we were ready. The client told us that it was ready. And what we didn't expect was that things would go wrong and they wouldn't be able to fix it. And so they started reviewing the product. It was the first review, so there was obviously glitches in this review.
Yeah.
And it was pretty bad. They had to actually make some major software updates before they did their major release. However, this media person got it first. I don't know. He was in really good terms with the client. So we had open conversations with this media person. And despite our good relationship with him, he really did a job of reporting where he said that he could not endorse the product, that it was a failed attempt. And that review lived at the top of Google search for at least 2 years. And it was, I guess it was very detrimental, even though the other reviews were pretty good, almost glowing. That first review, because it was with Mashable, because it was someone like that, it was just, it was killing us, because anytime anyone looked up the product in Google search, that was the first review that came up. And that was something, it went out too soon. It obviously, we didn't, I mean, you'd think, or I assumed too much that they did all their internal process. And we actually did a few reviews internally, but there were some units. I mean, as always, there's always some units that maybe aren't perfect. And the unit that he received was not perfect. I think there was like some jamming or some kind of situation that happened, and we couldn't repair it. He wouldn't allow us to send him a replacement. He wrote his review, he put it up, and it was pretty bad. And I feel like that's one really good example of product reviews too soon. Like now we don't, and this was many, many, many years ago. I would say maybe like 8 years ago, but now we don't send anything to tier 1 outlets, even if we have them. Like I'm working with a company right now, we're doing a review program. We got CNET, Digital Trends, and Yahoo in the very, very first round of pitching, and we still haven't sent them a unit because we want to make sure that the software is updated, everything's updated. Like I do not want another bad experience like that, especially with someone like CNET. And it was just, we learned a very big lesson, is to make sure that everything is tested as well. If it's a product, make sure it's tested. If it's a company that has a new message, make sure that message has been maybe tested as well. And I think also making sure that any CEOs, I've had bad CEO interview experiences too, have been trained properly no matter what they say. Make sure you do a dry run of speaking, especially if they're going to be on TV, because I had an extremely bad TV appearance for one of my CEOs as well one time.
Oh, damn. That is painful to hear, that review story. That is so unfortunate. But I suppose the only a good thing that come from it, they say, like you learn from your failures and not from your successes. So evidently you've definitely got a valuable lesson out of that, and now you're stronger and more prepared. So at least you got something from it.
I think the other lesson too, just for everybody, is just also, it's fantastic to score those big stories. Don't get too excited. Try to be objective. And that's what happened. We got really excited because we had a lot of positive attention around the pitches. And as PR people, we get excited too. We want our products and our companies to do well. And then of course, then you have to be this voice of reason for the client. You have to be the person that says, hey, hold on. Let's think this through before we push it forward. And so I think that's another really just important component. Everyone should dial down the excitement and just think of it maybe from an objective perspective when they can.
If you're interested in seeing how Publicize can grow your startup, sign up for a free PR assessment on our website. And for a limited time only, exclusively for the loudspeaker listeners, you can receive an SEO assessment as part of your package for any tier of service at no extra charge with this special promotion. To find out more, visit publicize.co/LSpromo.
And if someone is excited to go forward, like with PR, what are some signs that they are ready and that their business is ready, or whatever they're promoting is ready to go ahead?
I think it's just checks and balances. One, whenever we do an interview, and this is common practice in PR, you have a briefing sheet, you have background on the reporter, you kind of see the tone of the reporter, you create messages for that particular story. So one, making sure those messages and your narrative for that interview is ready to go. And then if it involves a product, making sure you've tested the product inside your company and outside your company, I would say, because sometimes inside you look over things that other people might catch on real quickly. So having an outside opinion is really important. I think those two things, if you do your due diligence on those things, and then obviously a bit of research on the competitive space. Also, what are the competitors doing? What is the most recent news from competitors? How do you position yourself against them when reporters ask questions about your competitors, because that may come up. Making sure you have those answers ready. And then last but not least, depending on where you are in your fundraising also, is making sure you know how to address financial questions. If you want to address them at all, it could be like, we no comment, we don't talk about finances because we're a private company. Or if you are willing to say, this is our lead investor, this is how much they've invested. So just knowing whether you want to answer questions or not. And I think a really good practice is, especially if you have inexperienced executives or speakers, or even if they're experienced but inexperienced in this particular brand, then doing a mock interview beforehand, just to make sure that those hard questions are being answered, and do all the hard questions. And if you could pass that test, I think you're probably ready.
Excellent. And yeah, I think those are all good pieces of advice. I especially would say that getting another person or a fresh pair of eyes, or an outside perspective, is definitely important, because it can be difficult to see clearly when you're so submersed in an idea. And I think you're absolutely right. So we know that you can enter PR too soon, but what happens if a business is too slow with their PR efforts? And is there a way that they can salvage it to make up for lost time if they start too late? I suppose this is most applicable for PR around an event or perhaps a launch, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've experienced that. There's two different experiences. One experience is when your PR team starts pitching early, but all of a sudden the company slows down, but you've already started pitching, and then you have to delay the actual interviews. That is the worst because media is like, okay, you pitched this to me, now what's up? Like, why are you taking so long? The media interest and the newsworthiness of your story is fleeting. So it is important that the PR team has all the latest details to make an informed decision on when to start pitching. And I have spoken to TechCrunch at length about this, several reporters. When is it too soon? When is it too late? And they typically give me like, hey, don't pitch us more than 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time, because 2 to 3 weeks tells us we can figure out where we can fit it in the story. And then also we have enough time to write it, but it's not enough time for us to lose interest. So that's one area of maybe jumping the gun and starting PR, but then also slowing down. And then second, being too slow to market. Well, right now is holiday gift guide season. So if you don't start thinking about holiday gift guides and pitching actively in the next few weeks, you're going to miss the boat. And there are ways, and this is just one example of different ways, but there are ways to kind of catch up. If you start pitching in the end of September or October, you can kind of refocus and shift your focus on digital media versus print media, but you're missing opportunities. You are missing opportunities. The way that you can catch up is probably if you have some kind of revolutionary news. And you really have to stand out, because the closer it gets to the holidays, in this particular example, the noisier it gets. A lot of people become late because a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to launch this product close to the holidays. And then they're, as we all know in startup world, your launches get delayed and delayed and delayed. And then, hopefully eventually it launches, but it was probably later than you wanted it to be. And so the only way to kind of salvage that in this particular scenario of holiday gift guides is to be something that's so revolutionary, and that, it's a unicorn kind of situation. It only comes along ever so often. So not everybody can salvage it. If you're too late, you're too late. And I think I've always tried to encourage people to start thinking of PR early, even if you're not going to do it right now. Just, even if it's in January is when it's not even too soon to start planning for CES 2021. If you're going to be doing something virtually online there. So I think it's never too early to think about PR. There are points where it's too early to start, and maybe not too late to start. You're going to have to start at some point, even if you're late. But the way to salvage is make sure you find that fresh, clean angle where either you could be tied in with trends, or you can lead the trend for next year or something like that. So you really have to find something quite riveting to say to gain the interest of people when it's very noisy.
Yeah. I think in most cases being prepared is very important, but certainly for PR, especially ahead of time, because like you said, there's that kind of relationship with time when it comes to journalists. And of course, like newsworthy information is always time related. But
Right.
obviously in this sense, you're like planning ahead for something you know that's going to happen. But even though like it's August, it's still, this is the first conversation where I've really kind of actually like spoke about like Christmas. So that's crazy. that they just said, I don't know, it just made me realize like, oh wow, Christmas is like less than 6 months away, I guess. But to be fair, I'm ready for 2020 to be over, so bring on
Of course.
2021. As I'm
Yeah,
sure
I
most
think,
of
I
the
think
world's
most
population is.
people, the common denominator of holidays and summer and school, back to school, no, but everyone's just like everyone's in the kind of lost in the ether at this point.
Yeah. So I have one more question for you, and we've talked a lot about PR horror stories, but before we go, I would absolutely love to understand what are some of your greatest PR stories, either from yourself or just from brands that you've seen, or yeah, just PR successes which you think, you know what, they did a really good job there.
Yeah, one comes to mind in particular. We worked with a company called Aftershocks. They produce a bone conduction headphone. And that is the example I give of the most perfect kind of campaign that we ran, that I feel is still reaping the benefits today. And that was like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. It was a crowdfunding campaign that we actually ran. Which is, a whole different dynamic, but very much like startup PR. But we had every single piece factored in. And not only did we plan really, really well, we had a solid team. Obviously, that's very important. We planned all the messaging. We planned the review program. It was actually multiple review programs for one product launch. And then we also weaved in the social media and digital marketing in with the PR. And so obviously in today's age, we talk about how the media landscape is shifting and the digital markets and influencer relations. And we really, my thought today is that all those things are obviously very married into each other. So a lot of people say, PR is dead, or they'll make comments on PR that are very like old traditional holistic views of PR. But in today's public relations is really an integrated approach with all of those practices. And so I think making sure your campaign has all of those things, really, it doesn't have to be, you guys don't have to be working in a desk next to each other, but they need to be considerate of each part of the program. And I think that has been our most successful program. One of my most beloved campaigns. One, I love the product, of course, and I always try to choose clients where we have a lot of passion for the product. So that was one big key aspect, is having passion for the product ourselves, being the people who would want to use it, and then also being able to translate that message to media reviewers, emulate that in social media, use that for digital marketing. And so that is like one thing where I found that the preparation for that campaign was just almost perfect. And I'm sure it could have been even better. There's always things that you can do to improve, but I feel like the dimension of that project was so great. We were able to reach a wide audience. We were able to cultivate community within their customers. And then also, of course, get an awesome, awesome review program going. And we started with their previous product, which hadn't been reviewed yet. And so we started with the older product while the new product was actually under development. And as soon as the new product was able to send us their production units, we shot out that new product to those same reviewers that we had just gotten the old product reviewed by. So they did reviews, I think, within 1 to 3 months, which is typically not a normal story. Usually if you get someone to review your like generation 1 product, they won't do another review on that product until like 6 months at least. So it was just a really successful campaign where the prep work that went into it really, I think, showed in the success of the campaign and how much money they raised and how many products they sold and how many reviews that they got. I mean, it was pretty incredible. And I would encourage anybody, and I think it's a misnomer for a lot of people who are planning in marketing and planning in PR, and a lot of executives kind of miss this boat, and they think like, okay, that's just something we can implement later. Sure, you can implement PR, marketing, social media, all those things later, but planning and having it in your mind is very important when you have customer conversations, when you have financial conversations, when you have branding conversations. So I just encourage everyone from that perfect example that I love to bring up, that planning, and we talked about that, planning is really, really prime, even if it's just like a mental planning. It doesn't have to actually be on paper yet, but planning and an integrated approach, I think, make the most successful campaigns.
Yeah. And I can also tell that like this is something that you're passionate about, not only because it was successful, but from the sound of it, like you really did believe in the product. And I think that is so important, whether
Yeah.
it comes to PR or sales. And obviously the two are kind of somewhat overlapping in some sense, but yeah, definitely believing that what you have truly is valuable and that you want to share it with people who want to report on something that's value or have like that, I suppose.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I mean,
kind of have
it's
something to
not
talk about.
always easy to get excited. I mean, we work with a lot of enterprise clients, and I'm not going to lie, enterprise stuff is not as sexy for sure. But I think you can find things that you love about products, and of course, I think, you know, as a PR people, we have to be honest with ourselves and honest with our clients about where they lay in the landscape and what's the potential that they might have. There are times where it doesn't pay to do PR. If you don't have stories, if you don't have anything riveting to say, if you're kind of like a Me Too kind of player, digital marketing, like, you know, Facebook, LinkedIn, you know, Google SEO, those options may be actually better for you. There are times where PR may not be your play. But if you are someone or a company that's doing something innovative or saying something different or trying to make a difference in the world, or you know, any kind of impact, then you just have to figure out where your PR story lives. And I think that's important too, knowing the right place and the right time and the right message.
Yeah, I can imagine that could be a whole another episode.
Yeah.
And I absolutely relate to you when you say it can be hard to really find the excitement in a story. I mean, God knows there's enough blockchain startups out there trying to disrupt the industry.
Oh yeah.
So,
Oh yeah.
so yeah, I totally get you on that sense. Ronjini,
Yeah.
if people do want to follow you or keep up with what you're doing, is there social media you can direct them to, and how can they find the PR Playbook podcast?
Yes, of course. So the Silver Telegram is our Instagram URL. The Silver Telly without the gram part is us on Twitter. We're also on LinkedIn, so you can find our company page there. And the PR Playbook podcast is available in your favorite podcast player of Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, I think a few others, Stitcher. And then, of course, the show notes and like the kind of home of the PR Playbook podcast is on thesilvertelegram.com/the PR Playbook podcast. We also provide a lot of worksheets and resources for people. So if they need a worksheet on like completing a press release or making a media list, or want to hear some of the media interviews, which I think are probably the most interesting ones, not to discount tips, but it's always interesting to hear from the media themselves. Then they can go to that website and grab and listen to the podcast just right from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ronjini. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much, Samuel.